Good evening. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Delighted to have you all here with us. Welcome to the joint Falls Church City Council and Falls Church School Board joint work session. Earlier tonight, Karen and Susan were honored. I had the pleasure of going up there and hearing a lot of fine things said about you two. And I guess I'd just like to say once again on behalf of council how much, I guess Susan's not here right now, maybe I should hold that for when she arrives, but it was quite nice to hear so many good things, all well-deserved, about you, Karen, and Susan as well. But why don't we go ahead and get started. Justin, do you have anything you want to say before we get started?
No, just thank you to you and to Mr. Shields for coming this evening to, not to say farewell, but, you know, to give your thoughts. So with that, let's jump in.
Okay, are we going to get started with you, Mr. Shields, or Ms. Jones, Dr. Jones?
Well, we haven't really worked out our choreography. What I'm passing out right now is the way that we would propose we would proceed. We have a number of slides on our preliminary revenue projections for the coming year, and then we'll shift to Dr. Jones to talk about school enrollment data. The Budget and Finance Committee had a discussion about these items at their last meeting just about a month ago. And then we'd like to spend just a little bit of time with the council on our capital program, talking about our financial capacity on the capital side, and a quick update on projects that I think everybody's familiar with from prior CIPs, and a discussion about where we're going with the CIP. So that's the plan for tonight. And Mr. LeCondre is the first up for the FY17 preliminary revenue projections. And one thing I will just say when we talk about revenues, and I'll have to be your clicker because I didn't bring the clicker down. But as we look at our revenue projections and look at what's happening in the region and in the state, it basically seems like we're in the era of the ones and the twos in terms of percentage annual growth, and that's true in Fairfax and Arlington. It's true if you look at the state budget projections in terms of what's happening in terms of what the economy is giving us, and that story remains a very significant drop-off in federal procurement activity that's impacting the whole state of Virginia, and particularly Northern Virginia, and very high vacancy rates in the commercial sector, which has kept our commercial real estate valuations in the region flat now for 5+ years. And when they're flat, all the other economic activity associated with those spaces is flat as well. And that's so that's what the numbers will show here in the City of Falls Church as well. So with that upbeat introduction, I will turn it over to Richard. I think probably the easiest place for people to see will be there.
I like this.
Okay, well, you can do what you want.
Now I'll come up there. That way Nick has to walk some more. Yeah, go to the other side. Yeah. Well, happy Tuesday, folks. What I'm going to try to go through very quickly is the FY17 budget planning discussion. We'll cover preliminary revenue projections, and then there'll be school enrollment data, capital funding capacity, update on capital projects, the budget calendar. We'll talk about key issues. First up is the operating budget summary. The projected revenue growth will be about 3%, which will be about $2.5 million. 40% approximately of all the revenue growth is due to development. In terms of expenditure needs, if you go back to FY16, we had $305,000 that we need to cover, and there is a $445,000 increase in debt service. What that leads to is about a 2.3% expenditure growth for school and general government if there are no changes in the tax rates. Next. All right, again, as Wyatt indicated, these are the projections that we've gotten from the other municipalities. There is a high commercial vacancy rate, and certainly there's a significant multi-year drop in federal procurement activity.
Assessed value.
Assessed value, I'm sorry.
So Arlington County and Fairfax County have had their meetings just like this one tonight in the last several weeks, in the last 2 weeks each, and those are the numbers that they're presenting to their boards at this time as well.
Next slide. All right, here's a breakdown. Yes.
Sorry. Why is our total revenue growth greater than our assessed value growth when everybody else is the opposite?
All right. Say that one more time.
Our assessed value growth is 2.8%, and the total revenue growth is greater than that at 3%. For the other jurisdictions, their total revenue growth is less than their assessed value growth.
Well, what we've included in our projections are the two new developments. We've taken some conservative estimates on what we think those local taxes will generate.
So the short answer is economic development.
Exactly.
Okay. Could I ask another question while we're asking questions? Back to the first slide. The 2.3% expenditure growth, what is that in dollar figure? If 3% is 2.5 million, 2.3% is a third lower than that.
It would be 2.5 million less 750,000.
Okay.
All right, the two items that I...
Yeah, plus the other two.
All right.
Thanks.
Here's a breakdown of the city revenue sources. All right, again, 59% represents your real estate taxes, 6% personal property, meals, utility, other taxes, and 9%. Sales is 5%, B-polls 5%, state and federal is 5%, and there'll be a 3% use of fund balance and 4% for service fees. All right, real assessed value growth in the city of Falls Church. Again, this is preliminary, particularly with the commercial. Our assessor has just finished up the residential. He collects sales numbers and does his magic, but it is preliminary. We really won't have final numbers until around the middle of January when we send out the notices. And what you see here is 1.7% increase overall in residential. Commercial's 1% increase overall. And your commercial development has a value of $47 million for FY17, and that produces your 2.8% growth in assessed valuation. Again, this chart is one you've all seen before. This is a breakdown of the real estate taxes in the region. We have a separate column for some of those odd items that we don't assess separately, like trash. All right, sales taxes. Fairfax 16 budget. We have a 1.6% growth projection. The first quarter was a 2.8% growth over 2015. If you recall, we went over the financial statements and we covered that. The FY17 budget projection is 13.3% growth, and that, again, includes new development. And for those that like the graphics, Ms. Oliver, there you are.
Could I just ask a quick question before we get too far behind where I meant to ask? In terms of the real estate rates in the region, Mr. Shields or Mr. LeCondre, could you just point out the jurisdictions that are most comparable to Falls Church? I mean, you've got Fairfax County, in terms of similarly sized jurisdictions, what are the most apt comparisons?
The most apt comparisons, I would say, are Fairfax City, Vienna, Herndon, Manassas, Manassas Park City. Those are our closest peers in terms of size. And so if you do recall from last year's budget, we provided a graphic that tried to group them by, with on the horizontal axis, population being shown, and we can produce that again. But it shows us in that cluster with our peers, and actually on the low end, generally of that cluster of the jurisdictions of our size.
Thank you.
All right, looking at meals taxes, as we've discussed previously, over the last 2 or 3 years, the meals taxes have flattened out. The FY17 budget is a reflection of that. As soon as our new development comes online, depending on what their composition is, that may help the meals taxes, but at this point, I don't see any reason to forecast anything more than it being flat. There was a decline in your meals taxes for the first quarter of FY16 when you compare it to 15. So it's flat. Next up, again, is your graph. But next up is personal property. The FY16 budget was $4.9 million. The actuals, because that is our first key indicator of the fiscal year, the bills come out in September. The actuals are $4.8 million. I would suspect that we had a 6.5% change in FY15 for the actuals over the budget. But I don't know that in FY17 that it's going to grow at that particular rate because we've closed the gap between what the budget and the actual is.
Wait, in 15 was the actual high? Sorry. In 15 was the actual higher or less than budget?
The actual was less than budget. We budgeted too high. We budgeted, I think, over 7% or 8%. And we came in 6.5% over the actuals for 14, but it was under budget.
Okay.
So the graph shows that story a little bit. We were trying to catch up to with our budgets to what our actuals were from 14 to 15, and we overshot the mark. And so we're trying to correct for that now.
Next.
Does that take into account the increased population that we expect in the new developments? Personal property tax? Some of them are going to have cars.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
However, the building won't be occupied 100% immediately. It's going to be a staggered occupancy. The total that was projected, I believe, for the 2 projects was a little over 100,000. So the growth is going to be negligible.
And personal property.
Not unless, you have, complete sellouts of the residential and everybody brings cars.
The personal property is billed also in September, and so, we're trying to project what the occupancy will be in September, and that, we're going to probably refine that number as we get closer. But
All right, so the overall revenue forecast for 17 is a 3% overall growth in revenue. The assessed value is going to be 2.8%. All of the revenues is going to be about 3.7. If you do the math and, the real property is almost 60% of your total revenue and the other revenue is 40, you come out with the 3%. All right, so the scenario looks like this. The revenue growth is going to be about 1.4 million. We're going to add new development revenue, which will bring it up to the 2.4. We'll back out the increased debt service, and the net available funds will be about 1.7 million. If we use our traditional formula, it's about 50-50. It'll be 2.3% growth for general government and the schools.
Sorry, can I, what's in the debt service? Is that the projected debt service, or is this an increase in debt service?
It's an increase in debt service. All right, we did a bond issue this year, this fiscal year, that number one, we didn't anticipate doing and having to pay interest. So this is now coming online.
And we will have a slide later that breaks out what was included in that debt issuance.
Let me ask you related to that, the return on the pension fund contribution, is that calculated in here as well?
No. You know, we made the investments late, and of course, our timing was just impeccable. It was just as the market began to turn a little bit. So the investment returns are going to be negligible. So we didn't include it in our forecast.
Okay.
I thought we were going to weight those over a 5-year period, but you know what? We're not going to talk about that right now. Percentage growth for expenditures is at 2.3% total, schools and city.
Yes.
So
It's 2.3%.
you got 2.3% each. How much money do I have? 1.7 million total. So if we go halvesies like nice people, it's
Right,
$850
$850.
apiece,
Yes.
and that percentage would represent 2.3. Okay.
When did we put in the, when did we invest the money in the pension fund?
Invested in two tranches, so one was in December and the second was in May. And investment returns have been relatively flat since that time. We do have one slide on pensions. Overall, our actuarial study, you'll recall, you got your presentation in August, so our pension costs will go down. And so that will help us both on the school side and on the general government side. That's not included in this because it's not a revenue. That's just a little bit of relief on the expenditure side.
Next.
Sorry.
All right, here's our recent history of operating expenditure growth for general government and the school transfer. You'll see the 7-year averages, the 5-year averages, 3-year averages. And again, we're projecting 2.3 this year if there's no tax rate increase.
Does everybody understand that slide?
All right, just the pensions. The city pension costs will decrease based on our 2015 actuarial report. We didn't include the potential return on investment from water proceeds. We'll do that in fiscal year 18. VRS, the General Assembly, is considering possible funding changes. We're still sorting through those numbers.
And I don't know if the schools have any updates on what the projection is on the VRS multiplier, but. Is it?
Hunter, sorry,
Don't speak.
Yes, thank you. At this, as of this fall, it was anticipated that the rate will actually drop slightly, and that was information Dr. Jones got from state officials, very slightly, but it's going in the right direction.
So we were going to shift here on to talk about capital, but perhaps before we do that, if we want to shift to talk about what the schools are seeing on the enrollment side.
What you have in front of you is just the budget planning, and this is actually part of our CIP where we update our annual charts, and usually by the time you see the CIP in the binder, these aren't in there, so I usually give them to you early on. I'll look at page 3 first, which is just showing you where Thackeray is. Thackeray, we've redone the charts a little bit so that you can look at where we are now. You can also look at what are the available seats in every building. Mr. Shields and I have talked a lot about that, not just calculating capacity, but also how many seats are left at each building. So if you'll turn to the next page, which is Mount Daniel. And as you know, Mount Daniel, and I've gone with the number that is in our 22, well, it's the number that we're working with right now as we're trying to get through our 2232. So what you see in red at the top would be the anticipated capacity after new construction. What you're seeing in the green is what we're able to have for capacity because we have trailers still there. And what you're looking at on the bottom is you're looking at the actual capacity of the building. So you can see that capacity as the building stands today has its challenges. And we also have the same issue at Mount Daniel, and you'll see it at George Mason, where we're also dealing with old trailers. So we're trying to be very thoughtful doing those annual assessments, but we could also see replacement of trailers in the near future as we are trying to work through all the construction. On the next page, when you look at Thomas Jefferson, and I'll just point out down at the very bottom, you'll see where the red arrow is grades 2 through 5, and then you'll see it looks like the number drops. That's because we are trying to find house space for second grade at Mount Daniel with the new construction. And when that happens, it does free up those seats across the top. So the number you're looking at in that green, again, is what we actually have left in capacity as we grow over time. And these are all based on the Weldon Cooper projections. But as you see, kiddos are expected to still keep coming to Northern Virginia over time. On page 6, you're looking at Mary Ellen Henderson. And this goes along, I think, with a lot of the discussions and what we talk about at Town Hall with our middle school. Our middle school has a capacity of 600. And as of FY16, right now, we have 43 seats in that building. Now, when I say it's 43 seats, that means we're almost at our threshold. Does that mean we could not put one more child inside the building? Well, you know, we're known to be very creative with spaces and keep, smushing them in. But it's really important that we think about what truly is the capacity of a building, because it impacts your cafeteria, impacts your halls. We've had 900 children on that Mason campus, but if you went down the hall, kids could barely get down the hall. The cafeterias are packed. So we have to look at what is the true capacity. So that's where we are at Mary Ellen, and that's why the expansion is in our CIP as well. Behind that, you will see George Mason. And again, George Mason, when you look at the capacity, you can look at capacity with trailers, which is that top line, and that's why we're able to breathe a little bit there. But what is the true capacity of the building? So again, we're at capacity in that building as it sits right now. And I point that out for capacity because when we talk about the RFP and we have expansion, renovation of a new building, you must expand the building. You can't just renovate that building. So I just reiterate that point. That's why that was in our RFP. Behind that, you will see the Weldon Cooper student enrollment projections. These are updated each October, and we work through UVA. They also do the enrollment projections for the Virginia Department of Education. They look at regionally what's happening. I was told this year the birth rate was back up again a little bit in this area, so it'll be interesting over the next 5 to 7 years to continue to watch how these numbers trend. And this does not include economic development. This is pure birth rate model with Weldon. They're looking at how many children are born to parents who live in the city of Falls Church. So down at the bottom, what you're seeing is future development, and we have a number for Lincoln and a number for Rushmark. Both of those developments will open this spring, and we'll be watching to see if those numbers, in fact, they come right away, or is it going to be growth over time. So behind this Weldon Cooper, this is a new chart that we have this year. And I put this in here just to, I think, demonstrate the level of commitment that city staff and school staff have to really be watching enrollment projections and how developments impact or don't impact school enrollment. And we're being very thoughtful to go in and look at by bedroom types. You have studio, one bedroom with a den. And this is just so we can project more accurately. That's really why we're doing this. We want to be able to look at a Lincoln or a Rushmark and know we're going to have X amount of kids so that when we are going through the budget process, we can plan appropriately for staff, for student seats, for all those materials and supplies and things that we need. And on the top portion, you're looking at the rentals that are newer, and the multifamily condos are on the bottom. And again, this is something the community has asked us to do, and we're trying to get better at this every year. And we did work with Tischler Bice. The city staff worked very closely for them to work with school staff on this. But there's just some really great information, and the number of students that come in different types of developments and where our students are actually coming from. Behind that is the famous students by dwelling. I can't tell you how many requests I had for this over the last 2 months and 3 months. It's just become one of those things everybody watches. And on that 2016 column, when it's in green, it means that the number went up. And when it's in red, it means the number went down. Some of them are slight shifts, a little bit more than others. On the second page behind that, which is page 11, that's where it kind of gives you the summary of what's happening in housing. We did get, again, working with the city staff who have been tremendous, new single-family home number this year, because as you know, we had a lot of split lot and there's just a lot of new construction. And it's a challenge to actually, keep up with exactly who's moved in and who hasn't moved in yet. And that new single-family number is reflected in here this year as well. And basically, when people ask me where kids are coming from, they're coming from everywhere. If there's a place where a family can rent or buy, or it's all over the place. So we're really seeing growth everywhere. And this is information you ask for every year. And so if there's something more on student enrollment that you'd like to know, please feel free to ask the questions, and we're happy to help get the answer.
Just one question, Dr. Jones. So if enrollment goes up by X percent, why can't the budget just be linked to, why can't you say, well, if it goes up X percent, then a budget increase of X percent will work for the school funding?
Well, one of the first things that we look at in a school budget is making sure that those items that we have no control over, like what I think you asked the VRS question, we do have mandates that are federal and also state. That's the first place we have to look, and that always takes a portion of the budget. Our staffing, 85% of our budget is staff. It's staffing, and much of that staffing is driven by the standard of quality, which is required by the state of Virginia, but then also areas like special education needs. We don't control those, and a cost for a teacher is right around $110,000. So if we need 4 teachers in our school division of 2,500 students, that's $400,000 right there. So when you're looking at that, it's not some years that actually could be lower than other years because we have a little bit more room in our class sizes. I can have one student move into the school division, for instance, who is hearing impaired, and I need a teacher for one student. So we are dealing with issues like that each year that we have to really assess and try to be as frugal as we can. But it's really driven by student numbers and the number of staff.
Other questions?
Could I?
Of course.
May I ask? Back to your first charts.
What page number, Mr. Duncan?
Yeah, hold on just a second. Page 4. So on page 4, for instance, in Mount Daniel, I'm just trying to match up the FY numbers with the September numbers. So the 364 enrollment number was in September of 2014. And so this past September, that number was down by 9 to 355. And next September, you expect it to be up to 367. The two actual numbers in that chart are 364 and 355. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
And that's reflective of that tiny kindergarten.
Right.
If we actually had that FY14 in here, it would have looked, it would actually look like an unusual graph.
Mm-hmm. And then on the next page, the similar numbers for TJ are 758 and 780. Those are actual numbers.
That's correct.
Okay, so that's a gain of 22. And the same then for Henderson. The actual numbers are 538 and 557, so that's a gain of 19. Okay, so then the chart for Mason is a little bit different because the numbers start a little earlier in September's, but basically the real numbers there that are most recent are 787 and 786. Is that right? Okay. So yeah, you're testing my ability to squint here. See, I need my reading glasses, but so overall, then there's somewhere in here there is an overall enrollment number last September and this September, right? Is that right?
The FY16, which is 786, is the fourth bar from the left. Is that what you mean?
I'm talking system wide now.
I don't have the system-wide actually in here. You could look at the,
We could add those all together, but
yeah, we do it every month on our board docs, and I can actually provide that for you. Our total system enrollment, and we always use the September number because we go up and down.
Right.
So right now, we are 2,500 and, what's that say? I can't-
34.
Thank you. 2,534.
that's the September just past number.
That's our current number from this September.
Okay, and then the previous September number would have been something like 2,500-ish?
We were 2,477.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, is it on here?
I'm going to say, surely it's somewhere here.
Oh, I guess it is on the, thank you. On the housing, thank you.
Ah,
And it's
it's,
bigger.
okay.
I forgot we had it on here. Yeah,
Okay, so
thank
that's,
you.
so when we're discussing, whatever the merits are of a budget which is calibrated against enrollment growth, at least we should know what the enrollment growth percentage actual is from one year to the next. And so that number would be calculated with those two numbers in mind, right? And thank you for the hard staff work that goes into the unit mix stuff. Again, the question is often asked, do we have any idea what we're doing here? And considering and sometimes approving new developments. And I think this sort of information answers the question that we have probably more granularity of data than any jurisdiction in the world.
I'd say that's true.
Which is good. Most recently, it shows us, right, am I reading this correctly, that, for instance, Pearson Square, 2015 September was 120, and now it's up to 125.
That's correct.
And Reed went from 0 to 1. Byron and Spectrum actually both went down, 13 to 9 and 19 to 17. Broadway stayed the same at 11. Northgate went up by 5. So the net gain in the newer mixed-use developments was 5 pupils, 183 to 188, which answers, at least to some degree, the question, how many students are there and what is the rate of growth in that segment of developments that we've been putting up. Okay, thank you.
And I might add one thing, Mr. Castillo wanted me to clarify too, is that when you're looking at enrollment growth, and you can't just look at the 3% and assume that you need X amount of teachers, because, we have a great chart actually that was in our budget book last year, and I'll get that to council, but it really is about also class size. So, for instance, last year we cut 10 positions across the district in order to get the budget to balance. So that means we have class sizes that are sitting at 23 and 24 is that threshold. So we may have 5 classes this year because we cut last year, and you need 5 teachers. So I just want to clarify, it's not necessarily because you're balancing, you can put a student, and then all of a sudden you reach a threshold where you need 3 teachers.
Yeah, understood, Deanna. We'll, I'm sure, have much more conversation about all that. I did want to go back to, well, we all know what we're up to here. We have, since 1989 in the manure mixed use, we went from 0 to 188 school children in 2016. So that's the number. We've gone from 0 to 188. In the single-family home numbers, which you now have, is it correct that I read that we went from 893 to 1,516? So we went from under 900 to over 1,500.
Oh, he's going across here. Good.
So, I mean, when we say that, kids are coming from everywhere, but yes, they are coming from everywhere. They'll do that. But, single-family homes is largely where the growth is coming from, single-family detached homes. I think it's just important for people to understand that because, we're getting there, but there is still a perception that that is not the case, and it is very much the case, and it's great that we now have data to prove that.
I think at the bottom of this chart, Phil, it shows that overall, I'm sorry, I should. Overall, during that time period, student growth was about 1,366 students. Almost 750 of those from multi-unit, right? Because it's not just the newer ones, there are other multi-unit buildings that have kids. And then a little bit over 600 from single-family detached.
Yeah, I appreciate
So
you calling.
188 number is not quite right.
Well, yeah, but it is, though. I appreciate you calling that out, but, we're not, when you say multi-unit, respectfully, I don't mean to sound as abrupt as I did there.
Thank you.
But, when we talk about multi-unit, we're talking about buildings that have been part of Falls Church since before even I was born. I mean, buildings like Merrill House and Oakwood and so forth. So those are, we have buildings that are that ancient. It's unbelievable.
From colonial times?
I
Is that
know.
what you're,
George Mason and I actually went to school together. But nonetheless, the number that I would respectfully like to see, put down there at the bottom would replace the multi-unit student growth, or at least supplement it with a line which says newer mixed-use growth, which is 188. Those are the buildings of the sort that we are now building. And
Well, yeah, of
so...
course. My point was, we're getting lots of kids from multi-use buildings, some new, some old.
And I understand that that's what supports the...
Not arguing with you,
Okay,
not,
right.
not against development.
Exactly. No, I know. We're on the same team here. We're all on the same team. But when we say the kids are coming from everywhere, it's the average person is hearing that in a different way than I think we are meaning it when we say it.
Susan, would you like to join us at the table, or maybe Phil and Aaron as well? There are a couple seats here if you guys would like.
I'm going to sit back here once Richard's done. I'm just trying to stay out of his way.
Okay, sounds good. Are there other questions about what we just heard? There's a lot of good data there. Thank you. Do you want to go back, Mr. Shields?
Okay, so we'll talk about the capital program now, and we'll start off with our current debt position.
All right, so we're going to show you a chart that's going to show you the current and planned debt, the debt amounts, the debt service projections. We'll talk about the capital reserves and fund balance. All right, so this first chart is your tax-supported debt that's outstanding. The total is a little over 54 million. 40.4 million is schools, 14.2 is general government. If you go to the next slide, it's the school debt by facility. So you can see each of the debt incurred by the various school projects that we've had. The next slide shows the general government tax-supported debt, and you can see the breakdown of the projects that were entailed there. Next slide. The 2015 general obligation bonds that were issued were 4.6 million. They included police cars, school buses, dump trucks, fire station improvements, the HVAC at TJ, traffic signals, and roadbed construction. Our FY 16 through 20 adopted CIP has 144 million of planned general fund supported capital improvements, 39 million not including the high school and middle school projects. And then we have a chart that breaks out the debt service projections. Any questions? Would you like me to explain that any further? Excellent.
No, you're not going to get out that easy. Just one, I think. I mean, again, in the recent discussions, questions arose about whether we should count the school debt as part of the allocation to the schools. But as I understand it, as we show it and talk about it now, the school debt is carried as on the city side, basically. Is that the way to explain it?
Yes, it is a city liability.
And I get that in a we're all in this together sort of way, but what is the actual rationale for doing that? Because it does tend to underrepresent the percentage of our resources that we allocate to public education.
The council has the option of including it in a transfer amount or not. However, for financial reporting purposes, we are the issuer of the debt, so we have the liability on our books. If you wanted to have a breakout in projections or in financial models that show the school debt in the school expenditures, you can. We have shown it that way in the past, but actually it's our debt, our liability.
So I think that's the good explanation. We can show it, and we, I guess you say, have shown it, but we don't want to do anything that conveys anything other than that we, the city, have the obligation to pay the debt. Therefore, for accounting purposes, we need to show it as our obligation.
That's correct.
That's the answer to the question, why do we do it the way we do it? Okay, thanks.
Chart at the bottom of page 12 is based on what kinds of bonds?
General obligation bonds?
Right, but what is the term and what is what's the term, 20 years, 30 years, what's
the term is 20 years, and generally, at least in the more recent past, it's 20 years, it's level principal.
The school projects, I think we're doing at 30.
I was going to say 30, it's 48 less 18.
But just,
Yeah.
that's the school
For-
projects.
Yeah, for the projections going forward, that's correct.
and at 30 years, are they continued to be level principal bonds?
Yes.
Are we showing level principal or level debt? I think we've shifted the big one to level debt, but what this is Davenport has built a debt modeling, debt model for us, and so we've shown the school projects in hashed marks in those bars because what we're working on through the PPEA project is a way to mitigate that cost, and so that's a big, obviously a big variable in this overall project. But I think it is important, even if we're able to significantly take care of that cost through a structure involving the exchange of a portion of the campus and economic development on that campus. We still have $40 million worth of other CIP projects, and they would take our debt service up from approximately $6 million up to almost $8 million. And so overall, our capital program is really ambitious. And as we're going through the CIP again this year, we need to walk through all of these projects and assess them in terms of their affordability. And so we'll be continuing to look at this graph. We do have I think a very helpful tool now going forward where we can run different scenarios with different capital improvement program options and pretty quickly run what this debt service projection will look like. But the other daunting thing about this is just 5 years of it. So if we stop doing any capital projects after 2021, that's what this looks like, and that's not realistic either.
Mr. Shields, that additional CIP going to 8 that you mentioned, is that the blue on this chart here?
Yes. So the green is our existing debt service. So those are bonds issued and obligations made. Blue is the remainder of the City Hall project and the library project and our transportation projects. Those are sort of the big and park improvement projects. So those are sort of the big components of that blue slice in the remainder of the CIP.
And what was the interest rate that you used for the projection on the GMHS Mary Ellen Henderson for this debt service? Was that?
It was 4 to 4.5.
For the uninitiated, what is the practical difference if it's level debt versus level principal? I have no idea.
Level debt generally results in lower payments. Level principal results in higher payments because you're taking 1/30 or 1/20 of whatever the principal amount is, and you're paying that every year. The purpose in doing that is that it frees up debt capacity freer than if you do level debt. All right, if you know with your home mortgage, you don't really start to see your principal go down on a 20-year mortgage until about year 7. You start seeing hints of it. All right, and that's why we do level principal, because it frees up and increases debt capacity faster. Unassigned fund balance. All right, our upper end is 17%, and it's reflected in by the green line. The minimum or the floor is 12% of expenditures. And for FY16, we project will be right at 17.
If I can ask you just to refresh my recollection, the things like the water sale proceeds that we put in long-term capital gain, those are assigned, right, to long-term capital gain, so those wouldn't fall in the unassigned fund balance.
No, it is not reflected in the unassigned number. You're correct.
What is the approximate amount of assigned and unassigned fund balance? Do you know, just off the top of your head, roughly?
Yeah, it's 11 million, I believe, of assigned.
11 million assigned.
Right.
And is that just the essentially the water sale proceeds, or there's some other thing?
Essentially, there is some other things in there, but that's going to be used up over the next year, and we're going to cover it in a minute.
All right. Okay.
Any other questions on unassigned fund balance before I jump to the next slide?
What's the actual M number for what we have now and are aiming for?
You would do that. I believe it's about 13.8.
High 13.
So the unassigned fund balance is 13.8 million-ish.
Yes.
Okay. And that's of expenditures, and expenditures are reasonably even through the year. I mean, when do you calculate that? Literally as of June the 30th?
Actually, for financial reporting purposes, it's calculated at the end of the fiscal year.
Mm-hmm.
We do it both times. When we give you the preliminary year-end report, we give you a number. When we do the projections for the FY16 budget, or when we present the proposed budget, we give you a number just so that you can be aware. The reason for that is your expenditures have a tendency to grow every year. So that would mean that your required reserves need to grow also. So it's not a static number. Okay. This slide is the planned use of capital reserves. Mr. Mayor, you'll notice there's a water sale column and a land sale column. So you have roughly 9.4 million from water proceeds in your beginning capital reserve. You have another 1.6 in land as a result of land sales. We are projecting in our capital program that we will use up the land sale reserves in two projects in 2 different fiscal years. One will be for government and school facilities. The other one will be for Big Chimney and transportation. The water sale proceeds, as it stands now in the CIP, are dedicated to a parking project. It's $3.4 million, which will leave you with about $5.9 million in your capital reserve.
When you say as it stands now, that's what
based on the
policy says now.
Based on the current CIP.
Mm-hmm. But for those who are coming on board new, and for some of the rest of us, that's very much still an active discussion.
That's correct.
Okay.
If we could hold that, I'll do an update on projects, but it is the public parking on Park Avenue for the campus area next to the library.
All right, your capital capacity challenges. The city has capital needs, as we all know. You know there's $144 million in the CIP program. I did not find $144 million in revenue. We need dedicated sources for capital, for vehicle replacement, for the C&I equivalent for our transportation projects as needed. If operating budgets grow faster than economic growth, your ability to do capital projects is diminished, because the more money you borrow for the capital projects, the more debt service you incur, and it shrinks your capacity to meet your operational needs. Here are our strengths. Our bond rating guarantees us excellent interest rates when we borrow money. Maintaining our fund balance helps to maintain that bond rating, keeps your interest rates down. Strong capital reserves, fully funded pensions, significant new economic development, and a record of strong financial management by city council and staff. That's how we keep our ratings high.
I was waiting for that last one there.
I bet you were. Don't hurt your arm. Any questions?
All right, so for a little more in-depth on projects and the upcoming process, I'll do a few slides. This is the CIP development process, and it's updated to reflect the current proposed budget calendar. And so February 1st, I'll be presenting the CIP to the Planning Commission. So on the general government side, staff is busily working to develop our projects, and I understand it's on the school board's agenda tonight. I don't know which part, if you've gotten to it yet, but I'm looking forward to receiving that. Do plan to continue the engagement process, open house, and then the Planning Commission scheduled to adopt on February 22nd, and this would be rolled into then the city manager's proposed budget to council on March 14th. And the current budget schedule has adoption by City Council April 25th of both the budget and the CIP. This next slide just gives you a synopsis of what we did last year in terms of community engagement and what intending to do again with the February 7th open house meeting with the Planning Commission, for example. Next slide. Now, to touch base on a few upcoming projects that are in the adopted CIP, and just to give a sense where we are. Also to let you know that for this year's CIP, we're undertaking a new biennial kind of process. And this is to reflect staff resources and the breadth of projects we have, and that sort of thing called financial constraints on the CIP. So on odd number years, i.e. this year, we're only looking for minor updates to the projects, and since we are adding the new fifth year of fiscal 21, that's where new projects could be considered. Then in the even years is where we're hoping, as we go into this mode, that we will then look at the bigger new projects and initiatives so that we can retain focus on execution. So that's sort of a new process that we introduced this year, and we'll refine it as we go, because it being in a transition year, it didn't totally stick to that concept. As for projects, of course, as everyone at the table knows, there's a heavy effort on the joint campus planning project with the RFP for the PPA out there for number 1. So that's a big impact on the CIP over time. City Hall, Public Safety, we are in the final stages of the A&E schedule and stakeholder input, and that task order contract will be back before council in January. Library design and construction is in the FY 18-19 fiscal year as it currently stands, and the Library Board of Trustees did not change the fiscal year when they resubmitted it this year. And to the question about the parking garage, that is the one on Park Avenue. It is the 2-story structure that is targeted for the whole campus kind of community area as a public parking, but obviously would provide a parking benefit for the library. As part of last year's adoption, council provided direction to do some additional study as to whether that was the right solution, the right place, and the only solution, just to look at cost effectiveness. So I'm completing this month a parking study that we looked at what's available in all the commercial parking lots and the roads around that area, going down to State Theater, down to the library and the Little Falls area, and the public parking down at Maple. That will be combined with the TDM parking study we did last February on the City Hall campus, and that'll be part of our analysis. Also doing some research on what options are out there for shared parking agreements, and if there's some private-public partnership that we can undertake. So we're in preliminary stages, but that's where we are on that. And we'll have that tied into the next budget discussion with the Planning Commission and then back to council and the community. Next. Parks, we do have the Howard E. Herman Park stormwater part done, so now the staff are working towards implementing the final trail piece, so that's progressing nicely. And in the out years for the CIP, we have a major focus on improving the trails in all the parks, and also improving ADA accessibility at park play equipment. The turf, and Mr. Horn is still here, we're pleased to say is progressing. It's underway. And I believe, I can't get to a lot of details without Danny or Mr. Horn, but the track should be spring because of the timing of events and weather. But it is well underway. We are finalizing design on a repair to the Van Buren Bridge, and construction should start spring of next year. And that is one where we had the whole pedestrian piece fall off, and so we've had to close that off. So this will do some traffic calming and pedestrian accessibility and ADA accessibility, and do a better alignment with our park on the city side in Arlington. Pursuing the bus shelters, we have grant funding and the issuing the acquisition contract, and then working on easements where the city doesn't have easements. And the real big project of South Washington Streetscape and Transit Plaza is nearing final design, so we can go out to bid and do construction 2017 for the plaza and the streetscape. Prior to that, we will be starting next year. We're in final design for undergrounding, so we'll actually be proceeding with the undergrounding on that street. So it's coming together nicely.
Before you go on, and I don't think this is trivial because the bus shelters were brought to my attention when I was campaigning for office, and that was a while back. And I have a series of regular questions from some of the more mature citizens of our city saying, where are we on this? And quite frankly, I'm embarrassed to tell them that we're still pursuing easements. Can we do better than that?
I would like to be, but it's turning out to be very challenging to get easements from the private sector.
Well,
So we are pursuing the ones that we have easements for, like at 24-Hour Fitness. We're buying the shelters, but it has been surprisingly a greater challenge than we anticipated after all the public's work on the bus shelter master plan.
But my understanding is we have all the funding and all the design complete and the locations, and it's
Correct.
a matter of easements. So I would like to be able to give these people a better answer than we're still pursuing easements.
We do have a contract out on the street to actually acquire the buses, and we do have about 4 that we control the land, and so we'll be able to proceed with those sooner than later. But as we go through the process, I'll be able to give you more update on the easements, but I can guarantee you the staff is working hard on it.
I'm
It's
sure you're working hard on
a
it. but
challenging
Let me
legal
remind you, my
issue,
term
so-
has 2 more years to run, so thank you.
I'll have some before that's up, and we're working. Yes.
When you start paying for these easements, these are pretty small easements, and when you start paying for them, then you get yourself into the pattern of having to pay everybody. And so we are generally conducting the negotiations to say this is a mutual benefit, and there's not going to be compensation by the city for the easements, and that's proving to be difficult.
And isn't it also the case that the architectural concept that we have for the shelters isn't necessarily consistent with what some of the folks from whom we're trying to get easements want in the way of a building structure in front of their property? I mean, I know the Falls Church Presbyterian Church was not so keen on, that was a problem that I don't think we anticipated when we had a one-size-fits-all design.
And so in working with it, sometimes we're looking at, is there a way to change the location and still have it within the general philosophy of the adopted master plan and where WMATA wants the bus shelters. And then we're having additional meetings with that specific church, for example, to see, well, if it's a slightly different color roof or in a slightly different location, does that help meet everybody's interests, and we can get it in place.
Yeah.
So it's heavily being worked, for sure.
It's the city council policy not to provide any conservation. Went through something similar at work with a property in Manassas that the bank has a lien on, and some conservation was provided. I mean, the amounts can differ, but would that help to down that sort of help?
We might end up there, but that's not our starting point, and it also depends on the different funding sources, whether it's federal, state, regional as well. But, you know, for bus shelters, which is a small footprint, the starting point is not to compensate because it has a ripple effect in terms of your costs. And it is ideally a partnership. And usually where we're putting the bus shelters, there's already a bus stop, there's the pole, and there's people standing. And a lot of times dirt and mud's left behind just because of the wear and tear. So we're trying to see where there's a win-win.
Under the category of key capital projects, the downtown improvements, the Dave Tartar shovel-ready sidewalk and other improvements,
that certainly would have
Should
been
have-
another one I could have put on here, and I didn't put all of them.
But
But that is progressing. We are in the process of securing the equipment to redo the LED lights and all the street lights and paint. We are nearing final design for the improvements up North Washington for sidewalks to streetscape and the crosswalk and pedestrian accessibility by Park Place. And getting a contract out for the brick sidewalk and concrete work improvements. All of that is progressing. Coming into winter, it'll be mostly deployed in the spring.
So we should see that project being worked on in the spring of next year.
Yes, and then we're also doing the design work and so forth for the electrical outlets and the water spigots as well.
Okay, thanks.
Next, please. This CIP slide here just is intended to give you a highlight of some of the policy issues that we'll need to discuss as we go through the next round of CIP adoption. Certainly prioritizing the projects and achieving the vision for the future, both adopted and vision and plans. There is, as noted earlier, $5.9 million left in the water sale proceeds in the capital reserve. So is that deployed or held for future projects? Also looking how to handle recurring pay-as-you-go costs, because as you saw, the capital reserve is zero for things outside of that water reserve. So how we handle ongoing expenditures and dedicated match money for transportation. And as we've previously talked, important things of reserves like fleet, facility, heavy computer equipment, those type of things will be important discussions as to whether there should be assigned reserves versus just an unassigned fund balance. And next slide comes back to Mr. Shields.
So in summary, with the revenue forecasts, we have about a 2.3% room if there's for operating revenue growth with no changes to the rates. And so that's our preliminary revenue forecast. That's what we're seeing. It's pretty similar to what we're seeing in the region. And we've got a lot more work to do on the capital program, and we anticipate that we'll have a lot more public discussion about those. We'll have the higher level engagement like we did last year on the CIP. We also have another town hall meeting on Saturday to talk about the high school and Mary Ellen Henderson project, and we'll be focused on trying to work towards the feasibility of these capital projects.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions that haven't been asked? Ms. Oliver?
Just at some point as we get into this process, if we could revisit the list of unmet needs from last year and make an effort perhaps to prioritize those things which might be a priority to incorporate this year.
Any other questions? John?
One question. In the beginning, Richard said that the revenue projections included things that were not online yet, but that were coming online. Isn't that a change from the way we've been projecting before? I mean, we've said we've either got it in hand or we don't, and that seems like it's a change. Or am I missing something?
What we have typically not projected is if something has not yet started construction, then we don't assume. We have not assumed in the past that it still has steps to go before they start construction. We don't bake those construction costs into the budget. For the major projects that are underway and are going to be delivered, we are working to try to incorporate those revenues into the FY17 projections.
Okay, so it's sort of a shovel in the ground.
It's a level of certainty issue, yeah. And those are and much higher level of predictability.
Vice Mayor Snyder?
Two quick questions. Will these presentation materials be available to the public on the websites?
Yes, they will be at city website /budget is where they will be kept.
Okay. And one other chart that's really useful to address Councilmember Duncan's issues on where the residential costs are is we've done a couple of those charts that show by project the new multi-use developments. So I think that's an extremely useful slide. I think if we're going to give people a good set to continue to think about development in the future, that's a really good, and I think it shows most of them are net positive. So I think that's useful. And then I wanted to call attention to, on page 8, we're saying that Lincoln and Rushmore will add potential total of, what, 81 new students? Is that, okay. And I'm not trying to make a political point, I'm just trying to get all the numbers out there, and I do think that chart where we go development by development is extremely useful because it shows that Pearson Square is not net positive, but it shows that most of the other ones are net positive. So it's a useful document, I think, to have along with these others. Finally, let me go back on one of my hobby horses, which is the LCI. Another useful piece of data that Tony Jones put together was what our costs would be if we were at the same LCI as Fairfax County or Loudoun County, and it makes a dramatic difference in terms of the money that our taxpayers are paying. So if we could add that to this deck of slides, I think that would be extremely helpful to people as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there other questions or comments? Phil, Aaron, do you all have anything? Okay. Is there anything else on this topic to be discussed tonight, or should we go into closed session?
That's it for the FY17 budget discussion.
Okay. So, go ahead.
I would just note before we go into closed session, we did have a town hall meeting on the last Saturday on the campus planning effort. I believe we had 36 people come. It was taped, and we had many council members there, many school board members there, but we will do that again on this coming Saturday. We'll be talking, Tony and I will talk about any changes to the program, but our intent is to have pretty much a similar presentation for Saturday's meeting, and the goal is just to reach as many people who might have questions or want to join the discussion about this planning effort.
Thank you. So do you want to maybe take a 5-minute break before we go into our closed session?
You read my mind.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay. Yeah, we can do the motion when we get back. I don't know if they want to break down the TVs. I mean, the motion doesn't have to be on TV to go into closed session. It should be. You want it to be? Okay, so then maybe we should make the motion now and take our break.
That's fine.
Okay. So do you want to go first, or do you want us to go first?
Yeah, would somebody want to read us into closed?
No, we recessed. We have 3 seconds.
No. Well, we're still in closed for, okay, all right, then we're good.
Okay. We'll do ours, yes. So upon a motion made by Councilmember
Oliver.
and seconded by Councilmember
Connolly.
and passed by a voice vote of City Council, Council went into closed session pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A.28 for the discussion or consideration of records excluded from the Freedom of Information Act, disclosure requirements pursuant to Subdivision 11 of Section 2.2-3705.6, which describes, among other things, confidential documents provided pursuant to the Public-Private Education Facilities and Infrastructure Act of 2002, specifically for the George Mason Mary Ellen Henderson Campus Project. Councilmember Baruch is absent. Councilmember Conley?
Yes.
Councilmember Duncan?
Yes.
Councilmember Oliver?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Snyder?
Yeah.
Councilmember Z?
Yes.
Councilmember Tartar? Yes. Okay. It didn't sound like the school board has to do anything then. So why don't we take a 5-minute break and then resume in closed session. Thank you all, members of the public, for coming out today. We'll resume in closed session. Thank you.